Dearest gentle viewer, welcome to another Bridgerton episode of Story Bakes with Katie Sue. In the last Bridgerton episode, I made a season 2 Penelope-inspired tart using her dress from the lake scene, so now we must bake something inspired by Colin from the same scene. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that Colin is nothing without Penelope. Let's head to the TV for inspiration. Colin's main personality trait from season 2 is that he went to Greece, so we're gonna run with it. The crust is made with black sesame seeds, and the inside of this tart is inspired by the most Greek of desserts, baklava. Now, baklava is not exclusively Greek, of course. There are many different kinds of baklava and similar pastries throughout a very large region, but it is a very popular Greek dessert. From what I can tell, Greek baklava tends to be made with honey, walnuts, and cinnamon. So those are the flavors we're going to focus on, with a walnut praline paste mixed with cinnamon feuilletine and a honey white ganache. To counter the baklava-like sweetness, we're going to make a tangy cream made with yogurt whose Greek origins are questionable at best, but whose marketing is excellent. In the Season 3 book Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, linked to the storybakesbookshop.org storefront in the description below, Colin's writing is a much bigger part of the story, and the journal entry that catches Penelope's eye is not about Parisian ladies, but about Colin's time in Cyprus. On Cyprus? In Cyprus? On Cyprus? Anyway, he describes the environment beautifully, so different from his home. The water is a blue unimaginable in England, aquamarine with the glint of the sun, deep cobalt when the clouds take the sky. So we're adding a pool of blue honey gel for that blue Mediterranean Sea. The design of the tart, of course, is based on Colin's outfit from the lake scene in Season 2, which also happens to be blue, and there will be Season 3 inspired bakes in the future. Now, let's get to the baking. Let's start the honey gel first, since it needs a long chill time. Soak 1.5 grams of gelatin in ice water for 10 minutes. I have gelatin sheets that are 3 grams each, so I'm using half a sheet. While that soaks, heat 170 grams of water and 20 grams of honey until steaming. Squeeze the excess water out of the soaked gelatin and add it to the honey water and stir to melt the gelatin. I'm adding a drop of sky blue food coloring, then covering and setting it aside to let it cool before putting it in the fridge. Let it chill for at least 8 hours. I'm leaving mine in the fridge overnight. For the tart crust, we're mixing together 120 grams of pastry flour with 17 grams of ground black sesame. If I don't have time to go out to an Asian market, I get stuff like this from a delivery service called WEEE. This isn't sponsored, I only have 40 subscribers. I just think they're really convenient, especially if you want to try cooking more Asian food at home, though they are only in some larger cities. My local grocery store just doesn't carry the big kimchi. Alright, back to the tarts. I'm mixing in 43 grams of powdered sugar and a pinch of salt. Then we add 57 grams of cold butter and mix until you get the consistency of almond flour. Then add half an egg mixed with black gel food coloring. Tasty. Reserving the other half for later. But Katie, how do you measure half an egg? I'm glad you asked. Weigh your egg, they're usually about 50 grams, beat it well, then measure out half. We're saving the other half of the egg to make an egg wash. Now I could go on and on here about how you should get a kitchen scale if you don't already have one because they're just so useful, and you won't have as many measuring cups to wash, and they're affordable. You can find them for around $20, but I'm sure you've heard it before, so I won't get into it. Roll the dough out, chilling in the freezer as needed. Here I'm trimming the dough that has been rolled out too long and patching it back in. The dough is very forgiving and it'll just smush right back together. After I've sufficiently 2x2 hands of blued, we don't want any dyed skin, I put the bottoms of the tarts in first, then re-roll the scraps. Then I cut out strips for the sides and press them in. I like to freeze them for about 30 minutes, trim the tops off and dock the bottoms, then return them to the freezer for another 30 minutes before baking at 335 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes. Let them cool for a few minutes, then take the tart rings off. Use that egg wash to help create a seal so that the crusts won't get soggy, then bake for another 15 to 20 minutes. We start the praline paste by chopping 285 grams of walnuts, then toasting them until they're nice and fragrant. Then we're going to make some caramel by melting 185 grams of sugar, stirring until it starts to melt. When it gets to the color that you want, stir in the toasted walnuts and spread the mixture out on a lined baking sheet and set it aside to cool. When it's cool, we break it into pieces and process it in the food processor until it becomes a paste. I forgot to add in some salt before, so this is somewhere between 1/4 and half a teaspoon. Do we just call that 1/3? Mine came together fairly quickly, but it could take a while and you may need to give your food processor a few breaks. It deserves them, especially if you're going for a smoother paste than I did. Baklava is made with phyllo dough, which makes it super crispy. For this tart, I'm making feuilletine to get that texture. It's kind of like a sugar cone, and it'll stay nice and crisp when mixed with the praline paste. Don't let the excess of vowels in the name intimidate you. Feuilletine is really easy to make. I'm taking 60 grams of softened butter and 60 grams of sugar and creaming them together before adding 1 room temperature egg. After that's all combined, in a separate bowl, I'm mixing together 75 grams of all-purpose flour with a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, a dash of cloves, and a pinch of salt, and then mixing that into the butter. Now I'm adding in about a couple of tablespoons of milk, then this gets spread onto a silicone baking mat and baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 10 minutes. It's important to keep an eye on this so it doesn't burn. Let it cool, then break it up into pieces for some wonderfully crispy flakes. I was going to soften this 150 grams of white chocolate by microwaving it in a couple of short bursts, but it was so hot that it was already a little soft, so I just put it in the container. I'm doing a bit of an experiment with this by adding 20 grams of cocoa butter. Since we're adding honey to white chocolate that is already very sweet, I'm replacing some of the white chocolate I'd typically use with cocoa butter. This probably isn't necessary, but I already have some cocoa butter in the pantry, so we'll give it a shot. I'm adding 50 grams of heavy cream and 25 grams of honey that have been heated to just before simmering, and then letting it sit for about 5 minutes before using a stick blender to emulsify it. This is just 225 grams of Greek yogurt. I'm using 2%, but use whatever you have. 50 grams of heavy cream, 25 grams of sugar, and a drop of sky blue gel food coloring. Turn the mixer on low to incorporate the cream and yogurt, then increase the speed and whip until it's the consistency that you like. This lightly whipped Greek yogurt won't hold up for very long, especially in the summer heat, so if you're making this, do this right before you're going to pipe them and serve them immediately, or pipe and then freeze them. I'll let you know when to do that during the assembly, which, is right now. Alright, let's put it all together. I'm taking 37 grams of melted white chocolate, stirring in 140 grams of our walnut praline paste, and 75 grams of the feuilletine flakes. Portion this into the tart shells and make them as level as possible, then put them in the freezer for a quick chill, about 10 minutes. There isn't really enough here to save, so I'm having a little Katie snack. Next, I'm filling the tarts with the honey ganache by... Really? I think these pastry bags are old, or maybe they're just not very good. I mean, it's definitely not me, right? Like, how would that even be possible? These go into the freezer to chill before piping on the whipped yogurt. Now, before we move on, confession time. I made a version of these that I wasn't proud of. Everything had been going fine up until the whipped cream and decorating, which should have made me suspicious, but the Katie of a few days ago was young and naive and therefore wasn't expecting these last couple of steps to go so wrong. The original topping was whipped cream with just a bit of Greek yogurt mixed in, and I put too much instant clear gel in my attempt to stabilize it because it's so hot out. The yogurt flavor was more subtle than I wanted. I over-whipped the cream a bit. The design didn't work out how I envisioned, and therefore there was no real place for the honey gel. So, I wasn't very happy with it. Now, normally I would have given all of the tarts away to friends that day, but I still had 3 the next morning. And I just couldn't let this version of the tarts go out onto the internet dressed as they were. I had spent the rest of the previous day and the morning figuring out what I wanted to do. Bonus points if I didn't have to go to the grocery store. And you better believe I got those bonus points. For the new design, I'm using a Wilton 2D tip and piping the Greek yogurt to form a barrier, then piping a little bit in the center just to cover up the ganache layer. If you're going to freeze them, now is the time. Then do this last part before serving. Fill the center with the honey gel, and here we are. Greek Baklava-Inspired tarts. I'm so much happier with how these turned out, and I love how you can see through the gel, just like with real water. Well, most real water. I think that the show did Colin a little dirty. What is his personality? Who is he? I feel like the writing of the show depends on us liking Penelope, and she likes Colin, so there must be something interesting about him. Let me know what you think in the comments. I love a discussion of characters and story. I did have the thought of running with the sad version of the tarts and saying how they were a manifestation of my disappointment in how show Colin was written, but this isn't trying to be a video essay on Colin Bridgerton, so let's get to the tasting. The spices come through, and the feuilletine is wonderfully crispy, and the savory note of the sesame and the tanginess from the topping filling are a nice counterpoint to the sweetness of the fillings, though the walnut and white chocolate dominate the flavors. I think the addition of the cocoa butter in the ganache wasn't necessary, so if you don't have it, use a total of 200 grams of white chocolate. I know that's adding more white chocolate when I already said white chocolate dominated the flavors, but there we are. See, I've been baking for as long as I can remember, but I'm learning a lot of new techniques and recipes as I make things on the channel. It's my goal to create more and more balanced and sophisticated bakes as I grow, so thank you for being on this journey with me. I didn't have any ganache left over, and you'll remember that I ate the rest of the praline feuilletine earlier, so here are the ingredients that we're using for Katie snacks. I'm breaking up the leftover tart crust pieces and topping it with that original version of whipped cream with Greek yogurt. It gets a drizzle of the praline paste, a sprinkle of feuilletine flakes, and a bit of honey gel. Hit the like button if you want to see more Bridgerton bakes. Season 3 bakes are in the future. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you're so inclined, and let me know in the comments what characters, shows, or movies I should turn into bakes next. Thanks for watching!